Hey there, welcome to the series New Lease Games on my channel Wolfbane's Gaming Den. Today we'll be highlighting the game Guns and Steel, designed by Jesse Lee. Jesse Lee is a designer that I've been fascinated by quite a bit in recent years. I started by playing his game Flow of History. I really loved it, sort of like a good card-driven, light civilization themed game that reminded me somewhat of Through the Ages in terms of how the game was really driven by cards. It was a little bit, obviously, quite a bit lighter than Through the Ages, but it gave you sort of like a good thematic civilization experience in a relatively short period of time, comparatively. That one played for about an hour and a half. So I was fascinated to find out that he'd also done another civilization-themed game called Guns and Steel, and I was actually able to pick up a couple of copies of those, and I'll get a little bit into why I have two copies of these. So Guns and Steel, was published back in 2015 first, and it has been reprinted a couple of times since, but it does not seem to be in print as of right now. The two versions that I have, the first one here is published by D&G and Modeus Game Design. Modeus, I believe, were the publishers for the very first one back in 2015. This one came out in 2016. It has pretty much the same cards, same gameplay, and so on. The other version I have is slightly more recent. This one's from 2017, published by Spiel. And the main difference between these two is that this actually has a couple of variants within the game. So one of the variants is called A New World, the other one is Renaissance. Renaissance was also released as a standalone, sort of like a version of Guns and Steel in between, and this one sort of like brings both of those together. Now, I find this series fascinating because when I went through the rules and I tried out the game a couple of times, again, it reminded me quite a bit of Flow of History, but like a lighter version of Flow of History, which again was fascinating because Flow of History reminded me of being a lighter version of Through the Ages. This is a lighter version of Flow of History, and it scratches that itch. If you're looking for a civilization-themed game that's small, compact, plays relatively quickly. I mean, this is not a 10-15 minute game by any stretch of the imagination, but you can get a quick game of this done in about maybe 40-45 minutes. Some can maybe go up to an hour, but 40-45 minutes is probably what you're looking at more often than not. So I was intrigued, and obviously by virtue of the fact that the game is in the series, you know that I like it. But I want to share with you why I do like it. What are the things that I like about it? It is a game that probably is not in print right now, at least not that I can sort of like see it in the stores that I usually go to. But hopefully, if this is a game that you've not heard of or you've not played, I can give you a quick overview of how the game works and talk about what are the things that I like about it. And hopefully that will get you interested in this a little bit more, as well as the designer, so that you can look out for additional copies of this if it ever comes back in print, or some of his other work, and hopefully discover a new gameplay experience that otherwise you may not have had. So let's start by going to the table. I'll do a quick run through of what the rules look like. I'm not going to cover 100% of the rules, but almost all of it, just to make sure that you get a good sense of how the game works. For the demonstration, I'll be using this copy of Guns and Steel, and then we'll come back to the table and have a discussion around what are the things that I like about it, things I didn't like about it, and why I feel this is something that you should be excited about as well. So let's go to the table and let's see how it works. Welcome to the table. Here we have the game set up for a two-player game. I will not go through full details of the setup and the rules themselves, but rather give you a quick overview of how the game works, so that you have enough to understand if this is the kind of game that might be of interest to you or not. I will, in a couple of days, have another video up doing a full tutorial for this game, so if it is of interest to you, keep an eye out for that. I will also add the link for the tutorial down below in the comment section. So with that, welcome to the table for a game of Guns and Steel. Here we have different cards laid out based on the different civilization eras over here. These are the wonder cards that are used in the game as well. Based on certain conditions, you will always be using 5 wonder cards. The game comes with 10. The other 5 will not be used in the game that you're playing. You will choose 5 based on certain conditions, put them out, and those are the ones you have. Wonder cards are usually good because they will give you a truckload of points over the course of the game. And the different era cards will allow you to do more and more powerful actions and also give you more and more points as you move up as well over the eras. So with that, let's have a look at how turn order works. Each player will start off with 5 different cards, basic starter cards in their hands. These are all identical, so everybody has the same set of 5 cards. On your turn, you're basically going through 4 different phases. The first phase you're doing is the resource phase, which if you can do, you must do. Resource phase basically is you playing one of the cards face down in front of you. When you play it face down, you will see that there is a symbol on the back of the card that is now visible. This is a resource that's visible to you that you can use on subsequent turns. So you played the card for the resource during the resource phase. The next action that you will do, which you have to do if you can do, is play a card for the development phase. When you're playing a card for the development phase, you're basically taking a card from your hand and you're playing it face up. When you play the card face up in this way, in this phase, so the development phase, not as a result of any other actions done subsequently, you can use the action on the card itself and do what it allows you to do. There are few different kind of actions that your cards will allow you to do. So this one, for example, has the civil action. Civil action usually gives you some sort of a production or resource ability for that turn as you're playing it. So if you do this, in this particular case, it says if I had a card that had this resource symbol at the back, I could flip it face up. Others may give you resources or something along those lines. The other kind of cards that you can play on your turn are these tactic cards. Tactic cards usually allow you to do some sort of attack ability or allow you to sort of like combine with some other sort of an attack ability over the course of the game. The third kind of card you can play are attack cards. Attack cards have these axe symbols on them. When you're playing an attack card, you're basically attacking all your opponents. You're looking at the amount of attack value that you have, which is denoted by this crossed spear and axe symbol over here. You're comparing yours with your opponents, resolving in a clockwise order. If you have more than anyone, you will basically resolve the effect of the card for that opponent. Your opponent also has certain abilities where they can play cards to beef up their defense as well on their turn, including certain cards that have the response action, which is denoted by this very top symbol here, where you can see 2 arrows going in 2 opposite directions, the black and white arrows. So you'll play the card during the development phase, resolve the action that's printed on the card itself. The next thing you will do is you'll move on to the purchase phase. During the purchase phase, you're acquiring a card from the tableau over here. You can pay the cost of the card to be acquired using these face down cards. And for the cost of acquisition, you can see that there's a banner here at the bottom right. The icons printed here within the banner tell you what the cost of that card is. So in this case, I must have a steel to be able to steel or iron rather to be able to acquire this card. Something like the caravan, for example, requires 1 bread, which I do have. So if I want, I could acquire this card as an example. The way that this would work is I would take the resource card I'm using to pay the cost, flip it face up, take the card that I've just purchased from the tableau, and I will put it face up in front of me. When I put down a card here in this way, by acquiring it, it is coming face up, but you're not resolving the action, so keep that in mind. And the card that I've also turned face up, I'm not resolving the action over here, so also keep that in mind. It is possible for you to move up and purchase higher tiered or higher era cards on a turn if you want, but it becomes more expensive because you're paying the cost for that card itself. And then for each card underneath it, and then for each card underneath those, you're paying 1 extra resource of your choice. So it can become very expensive to go up, which is why you might want to wait until it becomes available. Or if there's a card that you really want and you're saving up for it, then you can go ahead and do it. Purchase is optional, and you're only ever doing purchase of 1 card maximum on your turn. Once you're done with the purchase phase, you will move on to the end turn phase. At this point, you're looking at the number of cards left in your hand. So in this case, I would have 3 cards left in my hand. So if you ever have 2 or more cards left in your hand, nothing happens. Turn order passes to the next player. If you have 1 or 0 cards left in your hand, you will do a couple of additional actions. Firstly, you will look at if you have met any of the conditions for the wonder cards that are laid out here. So in this case, if we start off with the Great Pyramid, we can see that the Great Pyramid wants you to have 4 civil cards face up in front of you. So if I had 4 civil cards face up in front of me, I could pick this one up, flip it, put it on, with the image of the wonder side up. And in this particular case, this will get me 3 points at the end of the game. Whenever you see this symbol, the one with the scroll and the feather pen, those denote points. So that this tells you that you have 3 points as a result of having this card at the end of the game. So take this, put it in front of you, and then you move on to the next steps. In this case, of course, it requires 4 civil cards. I just have 3 in front of me, so I would not be able to do so. But if I did, I would be able to acquire that. The next thing you would do is any card that you have face up in front of you, you will take those back into your hand and then turn out will pass to the other player. If our situation looks something like this, for example, the cards that are face up, I would take these back into my hand, but the card that is face down is now available for the resource only. I can choose to take this back into my hand, or I may choose to leave it out here. I may want to take this back into my hand because I want to play it because of its action or ability on a future turn, or I may want to keep it here because I want to continue using the resource, or use the resource on a subsequent turn. So that's a choice that you have at that point. Once you're done with that, basically your turn structure, your turn ends. It moves on to the other player, and then turn order basically goes around. And this will continue in this way until endgame is triggered. Endgame is triggered whenever the very top era cards are acquired by somebody. So on the turn that happens, or all the wonder cards have been acquired. So at the end of somebody's turn, if all the top era cards have been acquired, or all the wonder cards have been acquired, that triggers endgame. Game will end immediately at that point. You do not continue afterwards. You will basically look at the total points value on all of your cards, so all the points that you're getting for the different wonder cards, as well as the different points that you're getting for these cards as well. So these cards also give you points, as you can see here. This one is worth 4 points. Easy way for you to tell would also be to just flip the card over, look at the points value in the back right here. Add up all the total points that you have from the cards, and whoever has the most points wins. All right, so those were the rules for Guns and Steel. Now, just based on, by virtue of the fact that I'm featuring this game in my series, you probably already know that I like the game, and I do. I think this scratches an itch for me that few games manage to do, and I'll go into more details as to why. But let's maybe quickly talk about my thoughts on the gameplay, and then we'll go into what I think works, and a couple of things that I think could be a little different, or might have been a little bit better. So to start off, the game for me works quite well. It is a light civilization themed card game, and those are rare. I mean, yes, you do have games like Seven Wonder Duels, which are card driven games, and they do have a civilization theme to it. But I find that for the most part they scratch a different kind of an itch. It's more of a drafting game than a civilization themed game from that point of view. Or at least I see it more as such. In this particular case, there is obviously no drafting, but there is significant elements of hand management. There is no deck building per se in the traditional sense, but there are some similarities that you can definitely see to it in terms of you're building a stronger and stronger hand, which allows you to do more and more powerful things as the game goes along, which is similar to what you would do with a deck builder. But of course, the mechanics are different. You're not really purging your cards at any point. You're not. You always have the option to choose the card that you play. So it's more hand management than deck building from that point of view. It is not a heavy game, obviously. Now, as I mentioned earlier on at the start of the video, I sought out this game because I was a huge fan of the flow of history, and then I was looking at what else the designer had done and came across this, tried it out. This is definitely reminds me of being a lighter version of Flow of History. Now, the Flow of History does not have the same flip unflip sort of an action. It's slightly different. You're bidding on something and then you're trying to acquire it at that point. But the cards work somewhat similarly in terms of what it does. It evokes similar feel. You can sense that there are some common DNA elements between the two. So if you like the Flow of History, there is a good chance you'll like this. If you did not like the Flow of History, you may still like this, but it's not a done deal quite yet at that point. Where this really works well is if you're looking for a civilization theme that is light, fast-ish, and easy to play, this is definitely up your alley. The rules can be taught fairly quickly. In about 6 or 7 minutes, you can run through pretty much most of the rules and get the game going at that point. It is easy to teach to those who may not be heavily into civilization-themed games as well, and might be a good gateway for them to get involved in it. For those who like civilization themes, but perhaps may not be able to commit to the multi-hour session that would be required for something like Through the Ages or Nations or Sid Meier's Civilization or something like that. This is not a bad alternative. It's almost a filler game, but not quite a filler game. The reason why I say it's almost a filler game is because of the weight. It's fairly light. It can be played in about 40 odd minutes, which for me goes a little above what a filler weight game should be. I think 30 minutes is probably that sweet spot. But again, 40-45 minutes, it's not that bad. It's a good palate cleanser if you're looking for something in between. The game plays well at multiple play accounts for me, as far as I'm concerned. It definitely works well as a two-player game because there's a lot of back and forth. There isn't much to be added by having more players, with the exception of when you're playing the attack cards, because then it becomes a little bit more interactive. You're interacting a lot more with multiple players. So there's more people who can mess things up for you, and there are more people for you to mess things up for, effectively. So the attack cards are the one that make it a little bit more interesting when you're playing with multiple players. But what it also means is, because initially when you're playing, it's fairly easy. You're playing a card for a resource, you're playing a card for the action, purchase, move on. Once you go a little bit deeper into the game itself, you will find that there are different ways in which you can optimize how you play your cards and how you sort of like purchase the cards, and then how the actions combo against one another and so on. If you're somebody who likes to be absolutely optimally perfect, or if you're used to playing with people who are of that ilk, just be aware that it can be a little, just a slight bit, but slightly AP prone at that point, where you're constantly staring and going like, okay, so I can do this and acquire that card and then flip this, which allows me to do this, so there's a little bit of that going on. Or maybe I want to buy that card and I don't have the resource, but here is what I can do with the cards over here as well as with the stuff in my hand, and make that play around. So that's one thing to be aware of as you're looking at a higher player count. The other thing is, generally it flows well enough, and why would you really want to have, because taking away the attack piece, if you have 3 or 4 players, it obviously takes a little bit longer for it to come back to you and for it to be your turn. If you're just playing a 2-player game, you will definitely be spending a bigger percentage of total gameplay time on your turn, doing things for yourself, optimizing things for yourself. So it can be a little bit more satisfying from that point of view. And then with 3 or 4 players, it obviously pushes towards the end of the full time limit that's allotted. So the box says 45 to 60 minutes. You realistically could go above 45 minutes if you're playing a 4-player game, even if everybody knows what they're doing. So keep that in mind. 2-player, I think, is probably the sweet spot. 3-player, I think, works fine. 4-player, if you really want that interactive, attacking and that ongoing aspect of it, that's where 4-player probably shines. But without that, 2 to 3 is perhaps the sweet spot for this one. But generally, I like it. And in terms of, and the biggest factor for me when I look at a game like this is, and it always amazes me in terms of how much gameplay you can pack into a small, tiny box. There's definitely a good element of gameplay in here. There's a lot of stuff that's going on, even though the game is light. And once you know what you're doing, it's you can just do your action, and it becomes a lot quicker over time as well. But there's a lot of game in the box for what it is. It's I would put this at par with something like Oh My Goods, for example, where that's another, for those of you who may not be aware, it's an Alexander Pfister game who's better known for some of his heavier games like Great Western Trail, Maracaibo, Mombasa, Blackout Hong Kong, and so on. But he has this small card-driven game that comes in a small box, and it works really well as far as giving you a meaty experience, a meaty Euro resource management, production, chaining sort of an experience in a small box. In fact, he did Expedition to New Dale, which was like the full-on board game version of that card game. And it was quite surprising how much of the DNA was already in that small box. When you compare the big box to the small one, to the point where you might even say, I'm just going to keep the small one. It gets me 80-90% of what I'm getting with the board game already. So why not just go with a smaller footprint? And why wouldn't you? And that's where I think this one shines quite a bit as well from that aspect. The one other thing that may be a challenge as far as the longevity of the game is concerned, especially if you're looking to do multiple plays in a very short period of time, is if you're playing a 3 or 4 play game, all the cards are out there in the tableau in front of you. There is not really much of additional mystery that you're solving in terms of discovering new cards in subsequent plays and so on. You will see all the cards. If you play multiple back-to-back games of it, you will probably become very familiar with all the cards. So that is a part that I should mention is probably the biggest drawback for this game. So you should be aware of it. There is that. But again, if you're playing this maybe once every couple of weeks, once a month, or even rarer, like honestly, at the end of the day with board games these days, do we really play the same game that often, that frequently? We probably don't. Most of us just tend to buy new games, play twice or thrice, and then you're off to the next shiny new stuff. So realistically considered, I think you may not get to that point. And even if you do, even if you play this game 4 or 5 times in a given year, that's still probably within that sweet spot where you can still be like, oh, that card really did something amazing. I just remembered that, and so on. It's still, not necessarily fresh, but it's still exciting with the gameplay. But again, if you're doing multiple games of this over a short period of time, you will know what the cards do, and there's very little new to discover at that point. Of course, that might actually be something that's of interest to you. You might actually like to know all the cards so that you can figure out what is the best, optimal path for you to climb up in this chain of cards, and this is how I want to build my cards and how I want to play my game. And if that's something that appeals to you, then this is going to be fantastic for something like that. With that, I think I've already mentioned the 2 key items that I think could be better in this game. One, the variety of cards, and then secondly, the fact that with the full player count, there could be a certain bit of AP, especially in sort of like the last third of the game, second half of the game, and not the second half perhaps, but like near the end of the game. But other than that, it just works wonderfully. It's a true civilization themed game that's light, that's easy to bring to the table. Setup takes a couple of minutes. Just if you already have the cards sorted, just lay them out, by era, and then hand everybody their starting cards, and off you go. It's as easy as that, and you still manage to get a 40-minute, 30-minute plus experience out of the box itself, even with a 2-player game. So that is really great. And if there is obviously a meanness with some of the attack cards, because some of the attack cards can really be like, I'm gonna do this, which takes your wonder card away, or does something of that sort. So if that's something that's not of appeal to you, then this might be a bit of a hard sell. But if you like civilization themed game, then you're probably used to a little bit of that already, so it should not be hopefully a major issue on that front. But yeah, games, the amount of gameplay that you have packed into this tiny little box, it's fantastic. And I'll quickly at this point also maybe compare it with the other version that I had out here, which I pointed out earlier on, Guns and Steel, a civilization card game. Well, so is this, but this one has a New World and Renaissance. So for the most part, the card art, mechanics, rules, and I think I haven't played this one in a while, but the New World, I believe, is the one that you see here, and Renaissance is the one that has slightly modified rules to it. But this, if you can pick this one up, I would say this is probably the best version of this game to pick up, simply because just for a couple of dollars more or a few dollars more, I forget exactly how much I paid for these, but it's not that different. Just for a few dollars more, it is a small box game. You will get 2 versions of the game, which adds to the longevity of the game that I was talking about earlier. You have twice as many cards. So this one, for example, comes with 45 civilization cards. Voila. This one comes with 90. So because of the 2 variants that you have in the game, there is just more cards to explore and more uniqueness to sort of like get through. For the cards that obviously, they do share, the artwork is the same, the mechanics are the same. In fact, they look identical. Like I'll quickly pull out one as an example. So here you have one of the starter cards for mining. And I believe I have mining here as well. So, this is from the TNG version. This is from the Pegasus Spiel version. Look at the back of the card. Now look at the front of the card. These are identical. So, this is just basically a reprint of this. So you're not losing out on anything if you can get your hands on that version, right? By any means. But yeah, so keep that in mind as you sort of like look for it. To the best of my knowledge, it's a game that's difficult to pick up at this moment. But if you can find a copy, highly recommend it. If the theme seems interesting to you, that flipping and flipping mechanic, it's really cool. Adds sort of like a bit of a pace to the gameplay. It's a fun optimization puzzle that you're solving as you move along. Highly recommend it if you can pick it up. And if this is ever reprinted, I will buy that version too. I like that game. I like this game that much. It's probably going to be in another similar, very small box. It's probably going to be pretty cheap. Might get new artwork with it. Who knows? Might get some additional variants to it. Might get some additional cards that come with it. I would be excited to try it out, and I think so should you be. If this is something that seems like it may be of interest to you. So with that, I think I've covered most of what I have to say about the game. Keep an eye out for it. If you have any questions on the game, anything you feel I've not covered that you want me to talk about, or any thoughts, comments, suggestions, feedback, please feel free to leave them down below, and I'll get to them as soon as I can. And in the meanwhile, good luck gaming, have fun, and I'll see you at the next one. Take care.